Apparently, there are also some ethical issues with pulling someone off the streets or out of prison and forcing him to podcast for you over and over and over again. Landing a volunteer changes some of those considerations, obviously, but what are the odds of that happening?
Who would want to volunteer for this gig? Welcome to Science Fiction Book Club, a podcast for bookworms and stargazers. In every episode, we dive into the pages of our favorite science fiction novels to break down the big ideas, ask the nerdy questions, and maybe learn a little bit about ourselves along the way. My name's Abu, and as always, I'm joined by my not duplicate, Opsa.
Not this time. Opsa Z here. Opsa Zero. That's original.
Right. Opsa Prime.
Opsa Prime.
Opsa, we are continuing our journey into Mickey7 by Edward Ashton today. We're covering 10 more chapters of the book, as the title states, chapters 7 through 17. I'm excited to get into it with you today, but first, we got to take care of some housekeeping.
Spoiler warning, you heard Abu say it. Chapters 7 to 17, folks. Please make sure you're all caught up.
Please.
Otherwise, this will be an odd episode for you to listen to. So as always, we of course encourage you, read along with us, share your thoughts, email us at sci-fi bookclubpod@loreparty.com. Join the Patreon at patreon.com/sci-fi bookclubpod. We've got free reading guides, discussion questions, bonus clips, bloopers, all that good stuff in that Patreon. It's also, of course, where you can find our Discord, where we like to keep these nerdy sci-fi discussions going.
That's right. And of course, as always, those links will be in the show notes below. Check them out after you're done listening. Now, let's talk about the game plan for today's episode. No different from our standard book club episodes. If you've been with us for a while, you know the drill. We will begin the conversation by summarizing the chapters from today's reading. Then we'll share our impressions of the assigned reading and perhaps even some predictions of what we think is to come later in the book. And finally, we'll wrap up by diving deep into a couple of takeaways in our sci-fi analysis. So, Opsa, before we get into all of that, let's hop into our bioprinters and freshen up a little bit. We'll be right back after a break, folks. Don't go anywhere.
Sergeant and Mr. Smith, you're gonna love this house.
Bunk beds in a closet?
There's no field manual for finding the right home. But when you do, USAA Homeowners Insurance can help protect it the right way. Restrictions apply.
I can say to my new Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra, hey, find a keto-friendly restaurant nearby and text it to Beth and Steve. And it does, without me lifting a finger. So I can get in more squats anywhere I can. 1, 2, 3.
Will that be cash or credit?
Credit. 4.
Galaxy S25 Ultra, the AI companion that does the heavy lifting so you can do you. Get yours at Samsung.com. Compatible with select apps. Requires Google Gemini account. Results may vary based on input. Check responses for accuracy.
All right, welcome back, listeners. Let's start with a brief summary of the 10 chapters for today's episode, beginning with Chapter 7. We catch up with Mickey7 and Berto as they're getting chewed out by Commander Marshall for, yet again, wasting precious protein. And as a consequence, they both get their rations permanently docked 20%.
Ouch.
And soon after, Mickey confronts Berto about leaving him to die, and he explains his uniquely messed up existence. He relies on his friends to keep him apprised and to know that what happened to him is in fact what happened.
That's right.
Berto does seem genuinely apologetic and guilty and apologizes, and Mickey decides to drop it for now.
Yeah.
Mickey7 then returns to find Mickey8 sleeping in their shared bunk before yet again getting called back to duty.
This poor guy cannot catch a break. That leads us to Chapter 8. In this one, we learn all about Mickey's training on Himmel Station, before the departure of the Drakkar to Niflheim. And here we meet his instructor, Gemma, who genuinely seems like a lovely person. I love Gemma.
Yeah, she seemed quite sweet.
She seemed sweet, a great teacher, really seemed to care for Mickey and wanted to make sure he knew the job and knew how to do the job well. Gemma also touches on some of the core philosophical themes of this book quite head on by teaching Mickey about the ship of Theseus paradox.
Right.
And explaining how the ship of Theseus serves as sort of a metaphor for Mickey's existence as an expendable. Quote, when an expendable takes a trip to the tank, he's just doing in one go what his body would naturally do over time. End quote.
Interesting.
We also learn about Mickey's very first personality backup. This first one was wild. It was 18 hours. Oof. He was plugged in for 18 straight hours, and basically his entire life flashed before his eyes, including some deeply traumatic memories of his mother, which leave him kind of a sobbing wreck at the end of the experience. Doesn't sound like a fun time. We then, at the end of this chapter, learn about Mickey's bizarre graduation ceremony, if you can even really call it that. This quote-unquote ceremony involves him putting a gun to his head at Gemma's request and pulling the trigger to prove that he is ready and willing to die and understands the stakes of being an expendable. He does pull the trigger, but Gemma has not loaded the gun. But he passes the graduation.
That's right. And Mickey becomes Mickey-1.
Mickey-1.
All right, Chapter 9. Mickey-7 has been called back into work because apparently a creeper has breached the dome for the first time ever and has eaten away at some of the metal.
Yikes.
Marshall decides they must go and pursue a sample of one of these creepers. Get to know them more intimately.
This fucking Marshall guy.
Well, Mickey-7 worries because he remembers the intelligent creeper that saved him.
Mm-hmm.
And he starts to draw some parallels to one of the colonies that we see him reading about later, the Roanoke colony, that didn't recognize sentient life on the planet until it was too late.
Right.
And at this point, he hasn't really told anyone that he has encountered what appears to be a rather intelligent native inhabitant of the planet.
Uh-huh.
During their mission, they end up, in fact, getting ambushed by the creepers. Dugan, who was honestly kind of an annoying
forgettable
guy.
Who is he?
Totally forgettable guy. I think he was a biologist or something, but was quite dismissive of Mickey-7's advice.
Yes.
And consequently, he gets murked.
He does.
The creepers take him down. Meanwhile, Kat and Mickey-7 barely escape, having successfully grabbed the remnants of a creeper and been rescued by Berto.
That's right. Okay, let's talk about chapters 10 and 11 together. In chapter 10, we basically get some flashbacks to Mickey's first couple of missions. So we learn what happened to Mickey-1 and Mickey-2, these first couple iterations. And the gist of that is basically there were some damaged field generators mid-transit, and Mickey had to go outside the ship and fix these generators, and in the process he was exposed to so much fucking radiation that he like melted from the inside out. It was kind of horrific, actually.
Ends up having nightmares about it, as
Yes.
one can imagine.
He is truly traumatized about it, and he often has nightmares, as you're saying, about Mickey-2 in particular, the second time he was sent out. In chapter 11, we jump back to the present. We're in the ship with Berto, and Berto reveals that this attack from the creepers was a total surprise. There was nothing on his radar.
Right.
And this suggests to us, the reader, and to Mickey-7 as well, that the creepers are intelligent. They're organized. This was like a sneak attack that was organized by an intelligent species.
Right.
Later, we are back in Marshall's office, sensing another trend here, folks. He's grilling Mickey-7 and Kat for this failed mission, for letting Dugan get murked. And he is holding them responsible for the deaths of the crew on the mission because Dugan and a couple of security goons got killed by creepers. Later on, Mickey-7 then tells Mickey-8 about the recent events, the deaths that have occurred. And then he falls into sort of a restless sleep. And this is where we learn about this recurring dream that he's been having for a while. Here's how the dream is described specifically. Basically, he is sitting by a campfire that is burning in reverse. There's a giant caterpillar that appears in front of him and speaks gibberish. It's totally unintelligible what this caterpillar is trying to communicate. And then the caterpillar smiles. Creepy.
Indeed. Well, we find ourselves in another flashback in chapter 12, and we learn that Mickey 3 has grown increasingly obsessed with studying failed colony attempts across the diaspora. Of course, the trauma of the first 2 deaths, Mickey 1 and 2, inspire this desire, this need to know what led to the failures of other colonies, because despite the heroic tale of diaspora life, there have been many failures.
Yes, indeed.
This is about around the time when Mickey 3 also meets Nasha, and they strike up a relationship. She tells him that she is not a ghost chaser, aka the natalist horny for the forbidden fruit of Expendables.
That did make me laugh.
Same. But we do learn that Nasha was an immigrant from one of these failed colonies, the failed colony of New Hope. She set out on the Drakkar mission because of the discrimination she, in fact, faced on Midgard.
Yeah.
Not quite the utopia that we may have imagined.
That's right.
For her, it never quite felt like home, but the hope was that perhaps Niflheim would.
Yeah. I did really like this backstory for Nasha.
Yeah.
I think it rounded out her character nicely.
Yeah.
Okay, chapter 13. We learn the details of this failed colony. The real reason why New Hope failed, there was a disagreement over whether a native bird-like creature was, quote, sentient and therefore deserving of protection and respect, or delicious and therefore deserving of a spicy dry rub in an hour on the grill, end quote. I'm getting hungry.
Like, where's that sentient meat when you need it?
I know. Should we go get chicky sandwiches after this? After we learn about this New Hope colony, Mickey7 is called out for another mission, and Kat joins him on this mission as well, while Mickey 8 continues to sleep. They argue about this for a little bit, but Mickey 8's like, bro, I'm so hungry. I just came out of the tank. You got to go do the dangerous mission again.
Hilarious.
So Mickey7 does. Mickey theorizes here that the creepers might be after their metal, and they may not even be interested in the humans at all, right? It may seem like they're attacking humans, but they might actually just be coming after the metal. And so he advises Kat to not wear armor out there.
Right.
That will attract the creepers. Quote, wearing combat armor out there is like walking into a wolf's den wrapped in bacon. End quote. Go out there minimal. Just go in basic winter clothing. Don't attract the creepers thinking you're going to be safer in some big hulking metal armored body.
Right. Remember Dugan.
Remember Dugan.
Fallen Dugan. Our hero.
R.I.P. to the most memorable chief agricultural scientist or something we ever had. This mission also goes south very quickly. They're ambushed once again. And this time, Mickey7 has this weird sort of telepathic connection with the big creeper he sees off in the distance. And he has visions of basically what the creeper sees, is my interpretation of it. He's seeing through the creeper's eyes what he and Kat look like standing there.
Right.
Before his mind sort of overloads and he loses consciousness. And they have to take him back into the sickbay, which is where he wakes up. Kat tells him that there was a large creeper out there, and Mickey sort of connects the dots and wonders if this is also the same creeper that saved his life before. Right. Again, we're sort of building all of these hints that there's more to these creepers than meets the eye, and that they seem to be intelligent and coordinated. Mickey also learns here that he has had an unexpected power surge in his ocular. The doctor kind of is like, you should get that checked out. Oculars are connected directly to your brain.
Yeah.
So I would go check that out. If that's glitching, that's a problem. And this will be sort of a repeat thing that comes up in the story again.
Yeah. He does curiously decide
not to have it checked out.
He's like, bro, I don't have insurance. What are you talking about?
Right. What's expendable insurance like? It's like
yeah, the rates are through the
roof. Right. Everything is a pre-existing condition. Your life is a pre-existing condition to death.
Yeah, that's right. We then find ourselves in chapter 14 with Berto apparently continuing this apology tour, I guess, and just promising the most lavish dinner to Mickey7, essentially for leaving him to die. I guess a dinner makes up for that.
Sure.
And it turns out that Berto is kind of flush with cash after having basically rallied everyone around a bet that he couldn't fly through this impossible granite pass, which of course he does.
Of course he did. This fucking guy, right?
This guy. Their meal is unfortunately interrupted. Mickey7 barely gets a bite in when one of the security goons starts to pick a fight with them. And despite the video evidence showing that they were, in fact, only defending themselves.
Yes.
Marshall, because we're, again, back in his office being grilled.
Again, right.
Docks their rations another 10%.
Holy shit, that hurts. Oh my God.
The Mickeys are now down 30%.
30%!
In 3 days, it seems.
Wow.
And Mickey...
Their demand has doubled?
That's
their supply has dwindled by 30%. It's not looking good.
These guys are not the greatest survivalists, I will say. Their strategy is not working.
It's not working. Okay, chapter 15. Mickey7 and Mickey8 argue over their increasingly diminishing rations.
Yeah.
Before 8 leaves to basically try to mooch some food off of Nasha, right?
Right.
Mickey7 then heads to the cafe to read a little bit because, again, this guy's a history nerd. But then quickly realizes that he shouldn't be there because fuck, 8 and Nasha are about to show up and try to get some food. So he rushes out of there. He narrowly dodges them and he heads to the gym, which hilariously nobody on this colony uses. It's just like this empty Planet Fitness. But of course, Kat is there. She is, in fact, using the Planet Fitness. And the two start to talk. After talking for a bit, he basically shares with Kat that Nasha, he can't go back to his room because Nasha is heading to his bunk with someone else. And he's kind of stranded. That's why he's hiding out here in the gym. Kat is a little bit confused. She hadn't quite realized that Mickey and Nasha were in an open relationship. But sure, she's not here to judge. And she doesn't want to leave Mickey stranded, so she invites him back to her bunk for the night.
That's right. And in chapter 16, we're with them the next morning. Things are a little bit awkward, but...
Sure. But they didn't fuck.
They did not. Absolutely did not. Makes it absolutely clear to us that nothing happened between him and Kat, despite them practically sleeping on top of one another.
Yeah.
They, in fact, pushed the two beds that were in the room up next to each other, and
right.
But nothing happened. We're
nothing.
confident. At breakfast, Kat probes Mickey a little bit about why he took the posting. She kind of suggests that he must have been a criminal. I mean, this must be a sexual deviant or murderer. And she also suggests that being an expendable has to have its benefits. They end up making some plans to meet up later before Mickey7 heads back to his bunk. But in a pretty classic sitcom mix-up, Mickey8 passes Kat on his way back with a hand that's clearly uninjured and that she is totally puzzled by, as she's just spent the last 24 hours with him and apparently with the injured hand.
That's right. Ugh, these two idiots. I feel like they didn't even, not once in the story have they sat down and talked about what the plan is.
Yeah.
They're just like fighting over the rations.
Right. They're winging it with their survival fully on the line here.
Fully. Their literal lives on the line. Okay, let's talk about the final chapter in today's assigned reading. Chapter 17, the best chapter in this book.
Top tier.
Okay. This is another flashback. This is another history lesson. We learn in chapter 17 why multiples are so reviled in the Union. And it's because of our guy, Alan Manikova. Don't you forget his name.
Oh, yeah.
So, essentially, Manikova was a Nepo baby who was maniacally gifted. He was a sociopath, but he was a genius at a whole other level.
Right.
It's heavily hinted that he played a role in the death of his parents in order to basically get his inheritance, to take their wealth, and he used this wealth to start up his first company called Universal Eternity Incorporated. Now, humanity, despite having had bioprinters for hundreds of years, did not have expendables because it turns out while you can reprint a body pretty easily, it is very difficult to reproduce human consciousness. That is where our guy Manikova comes in. He cracks the code. He is able to successfully not only recreate his body, but recreate his consciousness as well, essentially creating the first ever expendable. His next step then is wildly bold because he could have lived a lavish life of wealth off of that technology, right? This groundbreaking technology.
Right.
Instead, he liquidates Universal Eternity, basically bankrupting the planet in the process. Like he single-handedly starts a recession because the company is so big and his wealth is so large. He liquidates all his assets. He gets on a ship and goes to the nearby planet of Galt, where he sets about creating a mini clone army for himself.
Of himself.
Before long, he returns to his bread and butter, some might say, and begins killing the people of this colony in order to use their biomass to continue creating clones of himself. It's very resource intensive to create a human body, and what better way to get exactly the resources you need for a human body than another human body? It's the most efficient way to get those resources, and that's what he does. After some time, after many serial killings, the inhabitants of Galt kind of catch on to him. They're like, wait a second, this fucking guy, there's already like 200 of him, and there's more of him, and there's less of us. What's going on? They do the math and figure it out. But it's too late. Like, he has now cloned himself so much that a significant portion of the population of this planet is simply Alan Manikova's.
You do have to wonder what the naming scheme there was.
Right. Is it numbers? Does everyone get a nickname?
Al, La, Na.
Wild story. And so here's how Manikova's journey ends. He basically takes over the planet of Galt successfully. But luckily, before the final citizens are killed, they send out a distress signal. This distress signal is picked up by 2 planets. The first planet attempts to send like a military response, a traditional ship with soldiers and weapons and explosives and nukes. But because of their bureaucracy, they're like too slow to respond. And it also takes a long time to travel between planets. And so Manikova basically gets 20 years to build up a defense, aka build more copies of himself. And so literally this military expedition blows up the second it drops out of like hyperspace near the planet of Galt, because Manikova just has bombs ready to blow the shit out of them. Yeah. The second attempt is much more successful because they don't try to communicate with Manikova. They don't try to send soldiers. They don't try to do anything except blow the shit out of this planet.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what they do. They deliver what is called the bullet. And what it basically is they fire a ship at interstellar speed at 0.97 the speed of light right at the planet on a collision course. And when a ship of that size hits a planet at that speed, it has the destructive power, we're told, of 200,000 fusion bombs going off on the planet.
Yikes. Yeah, that'll do it.
So there we go. That's the end of every iteration of Alan Manikova as far as we know, and it's the end of planet Galt, and it is the start of this taboo against multiples. This is why no one is allowed to have two versions of themselves. We can't risk another Alan Manikova.
Yeah. Not another one.
Not another, or another.
That's right.
All right, so that is our summary and recap of chapters 7 through 17. Let's talk about how we're feeling about it. What did you think of this set of chapters, Obsa?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with chapter 17, since that's the one we just got done talking about. I think you and I both loved that chapter.
Loved.
Truly, I mean, I think peak writing in this book
Agreed.
so far. And it captures a lot of the themes that we talk about in the rest of the book around kind of the ethics of cloning, but honestly with just such a funny, potent, unique take. I mean,
Yes.
having this kind of maniacal sociopath basically exploit this loophole in the kind of interstellar and union laws to create, his own clone army. And, he's like watching sitcoms of himself while also giving himself a massage while
Oh
also
my God, yeah.
being the garbage man for the city. So it's, you can just imagine. I mean, I think it's honestly fantastic. And I think it also kind of highlights how I've been feeling about some of the chapters in the book, where I'm finding myself most compelled and intrigued by, the backstory and world building kind of outside of Niflheim.
Yes.
I'm finding myself a little personally more invested in the New Hopes of the world, or of the Union, I should say, the Midgards, and less so what's happening with Niflheim or
totally.
even the Mickeys.
Oh,
I don't
agree.
know. Like, am I? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
No,
I mean,
I agree. I'm in the
Yeah.
same exact boat.
I don't know. I mean, of course, the source of danger and mystery that's established very early on in the book, the propulsive element, is the ongoing question of Niflheim's native inhabitants, their possible sentience, their point of view on the human colonists. There's a lot that we kind of learn over the course of these chapters that builds on what we started the story out with. But ultimately, I think the pages really start turning for me when I get to these flashbacks that Mickey has.
Same.
And we also, of course, are continuing to follow the Mickeys' struggle to survive, really just struggle to get enough
Eat
food. Mickey 8 at this point has not, in fact, done very much. 17 chapters later, which I will just call out as a little puzzling in terms of the kind of plot development. The hijinks are good. I think there honestly could have been more of them if Mickey 8 was activated a bit more.
Yes,
but
agreed.
he's basically Snorlax for 17 chapters. Minus like the flute or like the clarinet that Snorlax plays.
Exactly.
And it's kind of curious to me that Mickey 8 seems far less anxious about their survival than 7 does. Anytime he's like leaving the room, he's moments away from spilling the beans one way or the other. And I don't know, I'm not totally convinced that the gap between the two of them should be, I don't know, as like wide as it appears to be. Like,
oh, totally.
Like the Mickey that we know even on Midgard was kind of like an anxious wreck, like he's not Mr. Suave confident, and for some reason Mickey 8 feels like I don't know, like he's got a little bear toe in him or something,
Yeah.
which
That's a good way to put it.
Just kind of curious. But I don't know. I mean, I'm curious what you've been thinking so far.
You pretty much took the words right out of my mouth. That's exactly how I feel about the book at this point, 17 chapters in. I'm truly 50-50 on this book.
Yeah.
And the dividing line is very clear. As you stated, The flashback chapters are great. I'm loving the flashback chapters. I'm really enjoying learning about the previous iterations of Mickey's. And in particular, I'm enjoying a lot about the human colonization efforts and the diaspora, which is what my takeaway later will be about. I'm excited to dig further into that. On the other hand, the other 50% is that I am so bored with the present day storyline stuff. Like,
unfortunately,
like you said, Mickey 8's practically doing nothing. Whenever Mickey 7 and 8 do interact, they're just bickering over rations and who has to do what job. We're setting up some like weird love triangle with Cat thrown into the mix, I guess.
Right.
Present day stuff, not getting me at all. Very quickly, I do want to shout out the things I'm liking. Like I said, the human colonization stuff, amazing. Excited to talk about that in my takeaway. The histories of Roanoke, New Hope, Eden, all of that is super fascinating. And I want to shout out the fact that there's some really fun, like hard sci-fi concepts in there too, about like space travel and the speed of light, and scientific concepts about radiation and cosmic rays and deflection, like with what Mickey had to do, Mickey 1 and Mickey 2 had to do with repairing the ship.
Right.
There's some really fun, like real sci-fi concepts in there at play.
Yeah. I mean, even the question of the fact that a drone could do some of the tasks that, you know, an Expendable is tasked with, but they just can't last quite as long. Like their parts will break down, and a human can go, unfortunately for Mickey and other Expendables, a little bit longer.
Right. Radiation poisoning is a bit slower on the human body. And of course, we've already gushed about the Alan Manikova story.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's utterly brilliant.
Yes.
And here's my hot take. I think chapter 17 overshadows every other chapter of the book so far. This chapter made me stop and go, what the fuck?
Yeah.
This is a better story than the rest of the book I'm reading. This one chapter about Alan Manikova, forget Mickey, give me the story of this guy.
Yeah.
Take me on a journey with my guy, Alan, you know? Yeah. And so I'm really, really enjoying that stuff. The present day stuff feels like we're circling the drain.
Right.
And it makes me think of that 3-star Goodreads review that we read in our first episode, where that reviewer criticized the main story, like the present day story with the two Mickeys, for basically not going anywhere. And now I kind of see why the reviewer said that. We're over halfway through the book and it's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And this makes me think about how in our meta segment last episode, where we talked about the author and how this book came to be, we shared how Mickey 7 the book started out as a short story / novella, like a much shorter book. And then later, with some editor feedback, Ashton fleshed it out into a full novel.
Right.
I'm starting to kind of see the stretch marks. You know, it's becoming a bit painfully clear that this story was meant to be much shorter and has been stretched out too thin into a novel length when it really didn't need to be.
Right. Yeah, if we had a third of some of the elements that we encounter, then we've got a short, punchy, kind of interesting, really excellent story. But when you write everything in triplicate, then all of a sudden you do have a full book with a lot of the same elements.
By publishing standards, I suppose. But the pacing is all thrown off in that sense. So I can't help but continue to think about how this almost would have been served better as just a novella, a 150-page like novella.
Yeah. I mean, as much as I am likewise enjoying the backstory and some of what is happening with the Mickeys, I have to say I'm not feeling totally enthralled with the story at this point.
Absolutely.
I think for being well past the midway point, I don't feel like the suspense and stakes have been really built up all that effectively. You know, if say the colony failed, well, okay,
so what? So what? Like,
there's not much to really invest us in. Like, we don't really feel that invested in any of the people that live there. Even this new character, Kat, I can't say I know anything really about her that makes me feel compelled about her survival. And likewise with the Mickeys, if they're discovered, well, we just get Mickey 9 then.
Sure. Yeah,
it's kind of messed up, but I don't know. I don't know that the Mickeys have like earned enough of my sympathy to, in fact, really care.
Yes, I'm in the same exact boat about the present day storyline. And what's kind of a bummer is I'm still feeling much of the criticism I did from our last episode, where I'm not connecting with any of these characters.
Yeah.
Like you said, I barely know anything about Kat. Why should I really care? Dugan, R.I.P. to our guy
The legend.
Dugan, the legend, who I know nothing about.
That's right.
So I'm not sad that he died.
And the truth comes out.
The truth is out.
Cat's out of the bag.
But even like Mickey, I'm not resonating that much with Mickey at all.
Yeah.
Nasha, I quite like because we got some backstory and motivation for her. But for the
right.
most part, you're absolutely spot on. The stakes feel super low. They feel super impersonal to any one of these characters, really, and most of the characters, unfortunately, feel like flat, like one-dimensional accessories to Mickey.
Yeah.
And that's a bit of a bummer. And ultimately, 17 chapters into the book, I, much like Mickey, am more fascinated with human history than with human present.
Well put.
Call me a historian.
Well, on that note, why don't we toss to a short ad break before we jump back in with our sci-fi analysis.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Last week was our first playoff game, and my plaque psoriasis was so itchy under all my gear. Sometimes just thinking about scratching could take me out of the moment. And then my doctor told me I could get clearer skin with a pill called Otezla.
Otezla apremilast is a prescription medicine used to treat adult patients with plaque psoriasis for whom phototherapy or systemic therapy is appropriate. Otezla can help you get clearer skin after just 4 months.
Okay, ready for the next game. Talking to my doctor about a pill was a total game changer.
Don't use Otezla if you're allergic to it. Get medical help right away if you have trouble breathing or swallowing, swelling of the face, lips, tongue, throat, or arms. Severe diarrhea, nausea or vomiting, depression, suicidal thoughts, or weight loss can happen. Tell your doctor if any of these occur and if you have a history of depression or suicidal thoughts. Live in the moment. Ask your doctor about Otezla. Call 1-844-4-OTEZLA or visit Otezla.com for prescribing info about cost, and more.
Welcome back, folks. Let's continue talking about Mickey7, chapters 7 through 17, by diving into some takeaways and digging a little bit deeper into the themes and ideas present in today's reading. Opsa, I want to hand the mic to you first. What do you want to dig a bit deeper into today?
Yeah, so I think talking about Mickey7, we're talking about Mickey8. There might be a Mickey9 on the horizon. Who's to say? We don't know, but we've encountered enough now that I think it is worth talking about cloning.
Cloning!
The central feature of this book.
That's right.
For my analysis this episode, I did a little research on the current state of affairs. What's the latest in cloning? In the US, around the world, where are we?
Where are we? How is she? How is cloning? What's she been up to?
Well, 17 chapters later, I have to say. Well, this book, does a great job of kind of raising some of the ethical and practical dilemmas brought on by a pretty advanced version of it, to be fair.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think well worth doing a bit of a deep dive into cloning 2025.
Yeah, great. This sounds fun.
To start with, I think it's worth defining some terms. There are two primary forms of cloning that we should be aware of. We're going to focus on the first one here, reproductive cloning.
Mm-hmm.
That's cloning with the express purpose of producing a genetically identical organism to the donor. That's making a Mickey8 if you've got a Mickey7.
That's right.
There's also therapeutic cloning, which we probably hear a little bit more about in the news and kind of in contemporary life. And it's essentially producing stem cells for medical research and treatment. And this is largely done with embryonic stem cells. Again, we're going to focus on the first year reproductive cloning, as that's what we've got in this story.
Right.
And is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So I think, most of us are aware of Dolly. We all went through that class
my girl.
That's right, in middle school.
My first celebrity crush, Dolly the sheep.
Right. Well, Dolly was cloned back in 1996 in Scotland. For some reason, I remembered Dolly as being like a U.S. thing, but no, in fact, it was Europe that kind of made the first strides here. That said, Dolly wasn't, in fact, the first cloned animal.
Oh.
Fully 35 years earlier.
Whoa!
In 1962, John Gurdon cloned a frog. He had
Holy shit.
the adult cells of a frog and produced living tadpoles from it that were viable.
Wow.
He actually, in fact, would go on to win the Nobel Prize for this in 2012 with Shinya Yamanaka, a name you should remember. We'll talk about him again later, for the discovery that mature adult cells could be converted into stem cells.
Oh, cool. Wow, this guy's been doing it for a long time. he's been in the biz for a while.
That's right. John Gordon Manikova. Somebody look into his parenting.
Yeah, for real.
Wonder what they're up to. I do think that part of why Dolly so massively captured the popular imagination is that Dolly was the first kind of large mammal, first red-blooded, warm-blooded mammal that was cloned from adult cells. And, secondly, Dolly was a sheep. And sheep are cute.
Hell yeah.
Also, Dolly was named after Dolly Parton. And I have to believe
that had to play a role.
That suddenly got, a few journalists talking.
Yes.
But they've got eyes, they've got faces, they're expressive,
Right.
It's one thing to clone a frog, but I think, a large warm-blooded mammal felt like, rightly so, a pretty big leap.
Yeah, made it more real.
Also, fun fact, Dolly technically had 3 mothers.
Oh.
One provided the egg, another the DNA, and a third that carried the actual embryo to term.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
A clone and a polyamorous queen.
Real recognize real. Well, in any case, the immediate reaction to this was pretty swift. So Dolly cloned in 1996, but the news didn't actually break out until February of 97. The scientists kind of involved kept it, really quiet, and wanted to, in fact, publish a paper before they got the news out into the public. And by March of 97, the very next month, the U.S. under President Bill effectively banned cloning. Banned cloning research. He issued an executive order that prohibited specifically the use of federal funds for cloning research and called on Congress to enact legislation to explicitly ban human reproductive cloning.
Oh, wow. This explains why there's no cloning in the U.S. today. This law must still be in effect.
That's right. Fast forward to 2025, and wouldn't you know it, we've got federal laws clearly, expressly forbidding reproductive cloning.
Cool. Nice. Good on us.
Psych!
Oh no.
As of today, March 2025, there is still no federal law in the U.S. preventing human or animal reproductive cloning.
Wait, what?
Honestly, I'm sure I knew this, but I'm still kind of shocked that that's the status quo.
I'm certain I didn't know this.
Yeah. I mean, if a kooky billionaire out there decided the world needs more of them, we need more Bezos, okay? They could fully theoretically pull a Manikova on us.
Oh, God, what a nightmare. Wow.
Nothing is stopping it. There is some legislation at the state level in the U.S., but varies state by state. And up until 2009, there was an amendment that essentially prevented federal funds again from being used for the creation of human embryos for research that would then be destroyed. But during Obama's first term in 2009, he actually passed an executive order which removed the restriction against federal funding of stem cell research.
Oh, wow.
There's some aspects of that are still being fought in courts, and the ethics around, obviously, the creation and destruction of embryos is, till today, super controversial.
Certainly.
But there have been some techniques developed since then, and in fact, in 2006, by none other than Shinya Yamanaka,
hey,
our boy.
Remember him?
Who discovered essentially a technique for producing stem cells without the use of embryos.
Oh, interesting. Wow.
That said, I mean, it doesn't quite address the overall ethics of cloning and producing, like, the production of viable living organisms.
Yeah, right.
You're still, there's still kind of that possibility. And in fact, in the U.S., animal cloning has been legal since the early 2000s. There's a company, Viagen Pets, that currently holds a patent for the process. They've got one competitor, as far as I can know, that is licensing their technology. But they've been cloning pets kind of left and right for years now. Thousands of pets and animals. They've got a backlog, according to their website. I mean, you can visit it yourselves at Viagen. That's months long. And
damn.
Celebrities, as well known as Barbara Streisand, have had their pets cloned.
Wow, that's super cool. That's funny because I have recent personal experience with this. Not me or anyone I know or am related to, but sort of like a colleague of a colleague, let's say, told me that they cloned their dog when their dog died because they missed their dog so much and they wanted just a second copy. I'm not sure I would ever do that with a pet.
Yeah, I'm not sure myself what to think.
Because the ethics are murky, right? Like, it doesn't, just because we can't do it, still raises a lot of questions about whether we should, and whether dog 2 is actually still literally the same as dog 1.
Yeah.
And certainly, gosh, it gets much more thornier when you move on from animals and start talking humans.
Oh, God. Oh, no. Are we there? Are we talking human cloning? Again, so in the U.S., at the federal level, not quite expressly forbidden to kind of perform human cloning. There is kind of a social and largely global taboo around the procedure and the process. I found that in the EU, they, in fact, expressly forbid reproductive cloning. But there isn't quite as unified a position on therapeutic cloning for the purposes of, discovering medicines and techniques to improve the quality of our lives as humans. It's effectively left to the member countries in the EU.
Okay.
China, on the other hand, expressly supports therapeutic and even reproductive cloning, with similarly the strict exception of human reproductive cloning. China is, in fact, probably the world's, I think, leader in active research and development. It's very well funded. There are very clear protocols for scientists that are interested in this line of research. And as recently as 2017, China had successfully cloned 2 primates.
Whoa.
Yeah, I mean, as close to kind of humans as we can kind of get right now, or at least has been successfully attempted.
Yeah.
All this to say, I mean, cloning is really not a subject of science fiction any longer. And it hasn't been for a while. The sorts of experiments that we see in Mickey7 that he and his previous instantiations are subjected to are, in fact, the stuff of science fact. Not with humans, certainly, but with cloned animals. That is kind of an active area of development in the world, the production of cloned animals for the testing of new medicines and kind of medical techniques. We are reproducing animals for culinary purposes. let me put it that way. If you've seen the movie Okja, I mean, there aren't super pigs per se, but there are super cattle. I mean, we do have cloned animals that are used for kind of industrial farming purposes. which all kind of raises the ethics questions again.
Certainly.
We have a finite planet with limited resources, and while epidemic hunger is still an evil and an ill of life on the planet today, so is the destruction of the environment. And being able to, I think, live within our ecological means is perhaps, a course that would kind of run counter to this solution that we have found in producing essentially cloned livestock and creatures for our consumption and for our scientific testing.
Right. And I will say, honestly, I don't know how I feel about cloning. It's not something I've thought a ton about. I remember writing a research paper on Dolly in high school one time and being super fascinated by it. But it's interesting to consider that cloning is not such a prevalent question in society right now. There are other doomsday scenarios that are scary to us more. AI taking over.
Certainly.
The climate crisis. And I certainly feel like there's a push toward AI and technological solutions rather than biological solutions like cloning to many of our problems on Earth. It's interesting. And I think the legislation clearly shows that too, where it's like, we'll deal with this when it's a problem, but who cares? We don't need to have federal laws around this right now.
Yeah, it's kind of puzzling. It has basically totally dropped out of the kind of cultural conversation, and it is still a very present kind of concern or ongoing development in any case.
Right. Very cool takeaway. Certainly makes me reconsider a lot of my feelings on it. Here's what I'll say. Not having given it more thought than the last 10 minutes. Here's how I feel about cloning.
This is not a hot take, my friends.
I personally actually feel totally fine with stem cell research and cloning for medical purposes, and also cloning resources, livestock, plants, reproducing plants and growing them at a better quality or a larger quantity, bigger, better, juicier animals, I guess. There are problems that I think could be solved with cloning, and that I personally don't have certainly at this moment, any ethical issues with. I do think when it comes to humanity, I draw a pretty hard line in the sand where I'm like, no, we should not do that. Maybe ever.
Yeah.
I can't think of a single instance where needing to clone a human 1-for-1 exactly would be necessary. I can understand cloning organs, right? For medical treatments and organ transplants. But to clone an entire human top to bottom, why? In what instance would that ever be necessary? That starts to get into Black Mirror episode territory.
Right.
Where you're cloning a dead relative to bring them back or something. And for me, that crosses too many ethical lines for me to think it's ever okay in any situation. But maybe there's a situation I'm not thinking of at the moment where it would be necessary and appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to take over the planet of Galt, I think we will.
Right. If Jeff Bezos is going to populate Jupiter, he's going to need a lot of clones of himself.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly it's a tricky one to say the least. Yeah.
It's a tricky one indeed. I'd be interested to hear in the Discord and via email our listeners' thoughts about cloning as well. Yeah. I think being sci-fi fans, it's a concept you come across more than your everyday person, maybe, who doesn't interact with the idea of cloning that much.
Right.
Well, I want to take my takeaway in a slightly different direction. As I stated earlier, I was super fascinated by the idea of the diaspora, especially by the way it's framed as the primary way for humanity to avert extinction. That seems to be the mission statement of the diaspora and of the Union, which is fascinating. In these 10 chapters from today, we learn quite a bit more about human colonization efforts. We get a bunch more history like Alan Manikova. And so I want to take a few minutes to kind of explore this idea of the diaspora and perhaps talk about some of the themes and what it might say about us and maybe what Ashton is trying to say through this story as well. So I want to start by addressing a criticism I had in the last episode. In our previous episode, I had questioned why anyone would want to even fucking get on one of these ships and go on this like dangerous one-way trip where you leave your family, your life, your home behind forever.
Right.
You know, why is anyone even doing that? Who's signing up for this? I thought we got a pretty good answer in today's reading. It basically boils down to like, this is the cultural norm in this society.
Yeah.
Quote, I wouldn't necessarily call what they feed as propaganda, but in every subject from biology to history to physics, they made sure to weave in something about the importance and nobility of the diaspora and the idea that it's been an uninterrupted parade of successes as humanity has spread across the spiral arm was pretty strongly implied, if never actually stated. So I was surprised to learn that there have been almost as many failed efforts as successes over the past 1,000 years, end quote. That's Mickey giving us a little history lesson on why people are pro-colonization. It seems to be deeply ingrained within this culture, within this human society. I disagree a bit with Mickey's assertion that this isn't propaganda. It sounds like he defined fucking propaganda.
And then fell for it.
So I am going to split hairs with Mickey on that.
Yeah.
But whatever, setting that aside, I'm glad we got an explanation for it. And I'm quite satisfied with that explanation. I'm also glad that we got sort of a counter voice to it, because Gemma, in the Gemma chapter, voices perhaps what the average citizen's view of joining a colony mission is. You know, I don't imagine every citizen ever is like chomping at the bit to sign up.
Right.
Gemma says, quote, I admire you guys. The colonists, I mean. I don't understand you, but I admire you. I get the romance of it. I get that spreading humanity as widely as we can, making us as disaster-proof as we can, is the whole point of the diaspora. But I could never just go. End quote. Right. Honestly, Gemma, girl, same. Me too.
Spot on.
I'm not trying to like up and leave my life and family and everything I know and love behind to end up on fucking Niflheim.
Right.
But
the voice of reason here.
Clearly the propaganda works because enough people do it that this has continued to happen for 1,000 years of human history. There's a romance to it. And there's obviously that clear mission statement. This is how we ensure humanity survives. And I found that particularly interesting. That's the stated purpose of these very expensive and very risky missions, make humanity disaster-proof.
Right.
And of course, that makes me think of all the disasters we face today.
Yeah.
Climate disaster, nuclear Armageddon, pandemics. We just barely survived one, right? All of it makes a lot of sense when you think about it. In order to make us invincible to all of these existential crises spread far and wide, get us off of a planet, off of a singular planet, so that humanity can't be wiped out. We're in too many locations to be entirely wiped out by one disaster. What's interesting to me is within the context of this story, it's clear that humanity faced some sort of traumatic inciting incident, you know, like that there was some sort of crisis that deeply embedded within this culture a drive to expand, to get off of one planet, to never run the risk of extermination from one single event.
Right.
And I will say, you and I have both, to be totally transparent, we have completed the book. No spoilers, but I will tease this. We get a really great answer to this later in the book, actually, what that inciting traumatic event was. Right. I really enjoyed it. Here's the thing, though. Stepping back from this, noble mission, an understandable cause, but we are still talking about humanity here. And that brings with it all the messiness of humanity. It's clear from today's chapters that many of these colonization efforts involve like ethically murky acts, and outright immoral choices being made by the colonists. Namely, it seems like humanity has not quite learned its lessons from ravaging Earth in this story. And rather than choosing to find ways to live with nature or to live in a balanced, sustainable way, the colonists who get sent out on these missions on ships like the Drakkar just brute force their way onto whatever fucking planet they've chosen to land on. Take, for example, the story that Mickey tells us about one of the most populated Union worlds that actually nearly almost failed in its original colony mission. Quote, I was just getting to the part where the head of the colony's biology section, who also happens to be the narrator, heroically saves the day with a tailored phage that clears the way for human-friendly plants to grow, while coincidentally wiping out the microorganism that had made it possible for local plants to grow, and thereby completely destroying the native ecosystem. When a boot nudged my shoulder hard enough to knock me half over. End quote. So there you go. That brute force method of we will come in, eradicate anything in our way in order to plant ourselves, humanity, as the dominant species on this planet. I do want to counterbalance that a little bit because it doesn't appear that it's all genocides all the time out here, because we're also told about the story of New Hope, that failed colony mission that Nasha's family was once from. A civil war broke out on that colony over how to treat the sentient avian species that was native to the planet.
That's right.
As we talked about in our summary. But again, the fact that the New Hope is like a famous failure of a colony mission perhaps speaks to the futility of this like soft-hearted, optimistic approach to colonization. You can't be nice to the birds because you're going to fucking get killed out there.
Yeah.
Maybe the only realistic way to survive out in a ruthless universe is to be more ruthless than the next guy.
Oof.
And Mickey himself states in the book, quote, for the record, there is always something in the local microbiodata that not only might, but in fact definitely will pose a hazard to human health. End quote. So to kind of wrap up my thoughts on this, I wanted to zoom out and ponder, like, what lessons can we take from this, right? Like, what is Ashton trying to perhaps get at with this brutal history of the diaspora? And I'll share my own feelings on it, but I'm curious how you feel. I'm a little bit saddened by how little empathy that humanity has shown in this book, in the history of the diaspora. We seem to have not learned our lessons. And as these sci-fi stories often do, I can't help but think back to Three Body Problem. Because in our coverage of Three Body Problem, we talked at length about the ethical conundrum of first contact. What happens when you come across these avian birds that are native to this planet and you are the dominant species? If humanity did find itself in the position of being the superior beings on a planet, do we have a moral obligation to preserve life to the best of our ability? Or do we, as the dominant species, have the right to just crush them like bugs? Because human survival matters above all else. Above these fucking birds, who are actually very tasty. But throw them on the grill for an hour.
That's right.
The optimist in me would argue that yes, like we do have a moral imperative here to try and preserve life. We should take great care, in fact, to preserve native life.
Right.
Particularly life that is less advanced than us.
Yeah. Observe the Prime Directive.
The Prime Directive, Star Trek, right? The more cynical realist in me, though, wonders if that is actually feasible. Wonders if, like, we do come across native life that doesn't think that way. We might value all life above all else. Native life might be like, well, fuck these humans. Our lives matter more. And what if they do pose a legitimate threat to us? What if those birds decide to group up and kill us all? Isn't it better for us to fight them and win first? Isn't that the sort of brutalist, realist, grounded way we actually colonize the galaxy? I'm of two minds there. The optimist in me wants to take the high road, and the cynic in me wants to say we got to do what we got to do.
Damn, Abu. Tell us how you really feel.
I'm saying put some spice on those birds. Get me 2 buns, some lettuce, tomato, mayo.
That's right.
And I'm going to colonize this fucking planet. 1 chicken sandwich at a time.
All we're saying is bring Chick-fil-A to Planet Avian, okay? Yeah, that's yeah, I mean I totally I guess sympathize there with like the take that ultimately we don't want humanity to be exterminated. We don't want it to be the case that we end up, having planet Earth as our only home, and then we destroy ourselves in some cataclysmic process, or, asteroid comes through and there goes the only kind of sentient species that we've been able to find in this galaxy and everywhere we've searched in the universe thus far. On the other hand, I will say we talked about this in, I think, our coverage of A Psalm for the Wild Built, and I had a kind of a bit of a deep dive into posthumanism and that school of thought that basically decenters humans from the narrative, and I think it challenges this perspective that if we were to find life, even non-sentient life, say just flora, just kind of plants, on or even microbiomes on another planet. I think putting the priority on human life is, of course, our defaults. Like that is our instinct. That is, our prime urge and directive as kind of living beings. And I think on the other side of it is the fact that we have the ability to resist those urges and to like take a path that is perhaps less survivalistic.
Yeah.
Perhaps more is not more. Perhaps we don't need to be a maximalist species that has conquered every planet we've ever encountered. I think avoiding the possibility of existential collapse doesn't, on the other hand, entail our domination of the galaxy or of other life that we encounter.
Yeah.
So I think I would probably myself fall on the side that, let the birds be. We have found life on another planet, and it's not. I think it doesn't feel to me like the ethical. I don't know if it's our ethics versus our survival. I'm probably in the minority of those kind of advocating for, death to humans.
Incredible take. Yeah.
But I think, there is something lost when we prioritize kind of survival over our non-base instincts. When we prioritize our survival, our continued life and existence over the upholding of kind of our higher nature and our higher kind of ethics.
The soul of humanity. Is it worth tarnishing the soul of humanity to survive at all costs?
Precisely. And so as long as it isn't totally zero sum, which, right now it doesn't seem like we could go to Mars and, if there's no life there, then, hey, we can set up colonies and
look, the universe is a big place.
Yeah. And far more of it
there's plenty of room to share, I think.
Exactly. Far more of it doesn't have life. So for us to then go and ravage the few life-bearing planets seems possibly like the worst of all possible choices we could make.
Yeah. Or even to put some sort of limitations on it, like in A Psalm for the Wild Built, where half the continent is sacred, preserved nature that humanity is never allowed to breach.
Right.
I would even be like pro-colonization if it was like, do what you need to, but make a choice on where to draw the line and make sure that some of the natural biome of this planet is preserved no matter what.
Right.
Pick a number, 50% of this continent or whatever has to be left untouched. I think there are compromises that can be made that still achieves the goal of human colonization and still gives us the flexibility to do what we need to survive, sometimes to make the brutal choices, but to keep ourselves in check, to keep those brutal choices in check. I feel strongly that compromise is not a bad thing. and can often be the solution and often the best solution because there is no perfect solution.
Right.
So the next best thing is often compromise.
Yeah. Find the middle way.
Find the middle way.
Yeah.
Wow. I love the rabbit hole our discussions take us down.
I'll have to give credit to Mickey7 for an interesting discussion.
Certainly, yeah. Well, at least the flashback chapters of Mickey7, I will say. All right, folks. We have some homework for you for the next episode. This one's easy. Read the rest of the book.
That's right.
There's about 10 more chapters left to go, so make sure you have completed all of Mickey7 before our next episode. We'll be diving into the final act of this book and seeing where our journey takes us. As always, if you're confused or wondering about reading assignments, what chapters to read, when to read them, what books you're supposed to put on hold at the library, not to worry. Check out the show notes below. We always link the schedule for the entire season there with all of our due dates and all of the chapters that you're supposed to read. So check that out and keep up with the reading.
Well, friends, if a podcast can go down over disagreements about a bird, about one damned bird, we're all one step from the corpse hole. So help us persevere and leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And be sure to check out the other shows on the Lore Party Podcast Network on loreparty.com. You can, of course, also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at lore_party. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, it's important to accept the podcasts in your life for what they are. There's no such thing as a perfect podcast any more than there's any such thing as a perfect anything.
That's right.
There is a perfect Manitoba.
Yes, indeed.
Manitoba 19. It was excellent.
Such a great guy, honestly.
It's just downhill from there, honestly.
Yeah, truly. He was so ground. Honestly, a total catch. Like his Hinge profile was perfect.
I matched with him on Bumble. Sweet guy.
Sweet guy. Totally sweet guy. 6 foot, blue eyes, works in finance. Like
That's right.
A total catch.
Total catch.
Manitoba 19. Don't fuck with 20. Oh my God. 20 was a hot mess.